Welcome to episode 20 of the Cancer Pod. On today's episode, we're talking about nutritional supplements. Should you use them? Should you not? We're here to help you figure it out in this episode, Supplements 101. I'm Dr. Tina Kaiser, and I'm a little bit country.
And I'm Dr. Leah Sherman, and I'm a little bit rock and roll.
And we're two naturopathic doctors who practice integrative cancer care.
But we're not your doctors.
This is for education, entertainment, and informational purposes only.
Do not apply any of this information without first speaking to your doctor.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast by the hosts and their guests are solely their own.
Welcome to the Cancer Pod. Hey, Tina.
Hey, Leah.
How's your road trip going?
It is lovely. I'm down in the desert in Borrego Springs, California. Highly recommend it.
Nice.
I have to let you know, though, the Wi-Fi is a little more glitchy than at home, so hopefully this episode comes off without a hitch.
Well, if it cuts out entirely, I'll just take over, do the whole thing. This pod is about supplements. We're calling it Supplements 101. Mm-hmm. And because there are supplements that patients take that they want to know if it's good for them. They want to know if it's safe, is it appropriate, all of that kind of stuff. And I just figured that we would talk about how we kind of go through our process on determining whether or not a patient should take a supplement.
So it's like the equivalent of teaching people to fish instead of giving them a fish.
Yeah, just kind of giving them that little bit of self-empowerment so that they can kind of, at least for the quality control part.
Yeah, a conceptual framework to make decisions from, because people are out there making their own decisions if they don't have a naturopath or an integrative practitioner. So helping them prioritize and how to do that, how to figure out which supplements you should take and which ones you don't need.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, you and I both agree that food comes first.
Always.
Yeah.
We have yet to be able to recreate the actual complexity of plant-based foods. What I'm saying is you can't encapsulate everything we need. It's not possible. So you have to eat the whole foods and the plant-based foods in particular, because even though we have identified essential vitamins and minerals, we'll just put that under the heading of nutrients, there's clearly other things in the foods that are essential.
Right. I mean, and they all work synergistically together. Like the benefit of something like broccoli can't really be replicated in a tablet.
Right. You know what I did once? I printed all of the known chemical compounds in a potato once. This was way back in the day. It was late 1990s, just to show people the complexity of a food. There was well over 10,000 compounds in that potato. And potatoes aren't known as particularly complex. I mean, we don't think of them like we do broccoli or kale or these other ones that we, kind of put on a pedestal, so to speak. But it was 14 pages long. I would bring it to lectures just to show people like, this is why you can't just take a pill and think you're getting what you need. There's way more in food than we really even talk about.
So we should talk about some of those nutrients that are essential, the ones that, can lead to those nutrient deficiency diseases.
Right. You mean the blatant ones like scurvy?
Scurvy, rickets. So scurvy is from a vitamin C deficiency. Mm-hmm. Rickets is from vitamin D deficiency. Pellagra is a vitamin B3 niacin deficiency. Mm-hmm. And then beriberi is from thiamine deficiency, and that's vitamin B1.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so overt deficiencies like that are, at least in the United States and most of the world, that's not seen in our clinical practices very often at all.
Right. But they do still occur. And that is the reason we don't see them so much, is because processed foods are fortified with these nutrients to prevent these diseases.
Yeah. They poke back just enough to keep you from getting a gross deficiency in the nutrient. But it's not the ideal. Processed foods, which are probably the primary food source for a lot of people, at least in the United States, is not ideal.
Right, because they don't have those nutrients innately.
Right. And they're missing all those other 9,998 chemical compounds found in that potato.
All those other 14 pages. Those are 13 and a half pages of nutrients. And then there are the kind of those like preventing or at least delaying some of those other chronic conditions. Like the first thing I think of is like osteoporosis, right? I mean, you ideally aren't waiting until you have bone loss to address your bone loss. You're doing things preventively, whether it's eating the right foods, obviously exercising, but also possibly supplementing with calcium, magnesium, vitamin D type things.
Yeah, yeah. And we had that whole episode on bone health and what to do and how to prevent bone loss. Interestingly, if people are replete in their calcium intake, especially in the first 3 decades of their life, they build up a better bank of bone. You know, it's a nice strong bone. And then, of course, repletion being the opposite of depletion, right? So I use the word repletion just to mean people have a sufficient amount of something. So if they can continue to get their calcium intake through food, and if need be, through food and supplement. So someone who doesn't drink dairy, for example, or eat cheeses or do any of that, if for whatever reason aren't able to get it from vegetables, because of course a lot of greens are high in calcium, if they can't do that and they have to supplement, that's fine. Making sure that they're replete in their calcium intake prevents the bone from being, if we're going to call the bone a bank, then you don't have to take any withdrawals.
Right, because your body will take the calcium from your bone if it's not getting it anywhere else.
Absolutely. And low calcium will not show up on blood work because your bone is such a large amount of calcium that's been stored. Your bloodstream will just always keep it tightly controlled within the parameters on that laboratory work unless something is awry. So that's another little tidbit. If your calcium is off, high or low, something's going on because your body does not like that.
Right. Because, yeah, I mean, low calcium does show up on blood work, but that's major. That's not like, oh, I have a little osteoporosis. That's like something's going on.
Well, yes. And just usually in cancer care, low calcium follows low albumin because if the albumin is low, the calcium may look low because it has to do with low albumin. Will show up like low calcium on there, but not be real.
Right. That's the corrected calcium.
Corrected calcium, right. There's a corrected calcium equation you can use when the person's albumin is low.
The third reason for taking or being recommended to take a supplement would be more that sort of green pharmacy thing. Like, you know, I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is like ginger capsules for nausea. Right. You don't have a ginger deficiency.
Yes.
You know, and you're just kind of using it in place of or in addition to a medication.
Yes.
To address a symptom. So I think that's like the easiest thing that pops into mind.
Yeah. And I think that is the easiest thing. It's like basic programming. It's if this, then that loops. If nausea, then ginger. If osteoarthritis, then glucosamine. You know, we call it green pharmacy because we're just using it in lieu of some drug that otherwise would be used.
Or in conjunction with. Yeah. As long as there's no interaction.
Right.
Which we'll get to.
So the way I would put this is there's 3 ways to prioritize the supplements. When I'm looking at someone in my office, I think to myself, what do we need for repletion to make sure they're not deficient? Like given this person's scenario, whatever's going on in their life, treatment, out of treatment, history, absorption, like taking that case, what do we need to replete them with? You know, what nutrients are they not getting? You know, living up in the Northwest, I think of vitamin D. A lot of people don't get enough of that. So we often end up having to supplement vitamin D. And then I think of the second priority is problem solving. You know, if you're constipated, then what can you take to relieve that nutrient wise? And then the third is the more global picture of taking who they are, their family history, maybe their history of cancer, and saying, what can we do to change that using supplements, right? So that's my priority. Make sure there's no deficiency, then go to problem solving or symptom management, and then go to weaknesses of organ systems in that person or their family history. So that's kind of how I think of it, 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. And I guess mine's kind of similar. I think of it a little differently just because of having worked in hospitals. Like I have to be hyper vigilant about checking for interactions. And so what I usually do is, you know, the patient comes in and they've got their supply of supplements and I will go through, I'm sure you do the same. You go through each one. And I learned the hard way. I ask them, why are you taking this? I don't say, oh, this is for your heart. You know, like I don't assume anything. I just ask them, why are you taking this? And the answer can be, oh, my doctor told me I need that for my eyes. Or I heard so and so on TV recommend it and it sounded good. My friend, my relative recommended it. It could be something that I would not have thought of. So I had a patient who I was going through their supplements and they were taking vitamin E capsules. And I had assumed it was for one thing. I don't know, like heart health or something. I didn't know why they were taking it. And they said, oh, no, I take it for skin. I heard it was really good for wrinkles.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not what I hear typically as a use for vitamin E. So I think it's always good to ask, why are you taking this? How often do you take it? That sort of thing. And then, like you said, do they need it? Is it something where they're a vegetarian or a vegan? And so maybe they do need those extra B vitamins. Do they have a history of malabsorption? If they're in active treatment, are they not getting enough nutrients because they are having vomiting and diarrhea, lack of appetite? If somebody doesn't have an appetite, I don't necessarily want them taking pills because those can contribute to nausea as well.
Right.
But, just kind of like keeping all of those things in mind, making sure that people are nutrient replete during their treatment.
And food always does come first because supplements are called that because they're supplemental.
Exactly. And so that's like my next part. Can we take this as food? Instead of taking these, can it be fruits and vegetables, grains, those kinds of things? So that would be like my next part. And then how safe is it? Is it going to interact with their active treatment or any other medications that they take if they're taking blood pressure medication or, anything? Is it going to interact with that? And then, as we know, there are some supplements that are contraindicated if you are a smoker.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's important to remember. There's definitely some clearly contraindicated supplements if someone is smoking. I would put carotenoids under that heading, like beta carotene especially. There's been evidence that actually increases the risk of lung cancer in smokers specifically. And the other one that comes to mind right away, and that research came out more recently, is there was an association of lung cancer in smokers who took B complex.
Right.
Yeah. And that was high dose B complex. It wasn't just repletion of B vitamins. It was a big dose of B vitamins.
Right. And then the next part that I talk to them about is how to look at a label. And if you look at something and it has a super high dose amount of any sort of vitamin or mineral, question that. Like, do you really need that much? And then the other thing is that sort of kitchen sink supplement where it's got everything in it. It's like one horse pill and you have all of the vegetables and fruits you ever needed. And it's got all these herbs for your immune system and mushrooms and all of this. And you just have to take one pill a day. That I'm like, question that.
Yes.
It doesn't make, like, you're not getting any true value from it.
That reminds me, as you're talking, I'm having this visual. I can recollect with people, I do the same thing. I'll go through all their supplements and sometimes there's like a grocery bag full or a couple boxes. I mean, some people are taking...
I've seen suitcases.
So I will often put them up on the table and have them choose the ones they think they feel the most. Like, which of these do you feel some relief from for any symptom? Like, I would need to know which ones you're truly married to taking so that we put those to the side. And then I'll ask them what they get from those. If they pull out one of these, and one of them was I remember this, it came in something that looked like a wine bottle and it was a liquid. And I had more than one person put that aside and say, my arthritis goes away. I have less pain. And then I look at the ingredients and I can tell you there was nothing in there that warranted that strong of an anti-inflammatory effect. My suspicion with a company like this that puts in a litany of different quote unquote whole foods, I don't know what they're putting in it exactly, and then they put it into a liquid, it's very hard to deconstruct this, right? You can't tell what the heck is in there, really. My suspicion is that they're also adding a little bit of ibuprofen or a little bit of something that is truly reliable because they're charging, $30 or $40 per bottle. The contents don't warrant that kind of cost, but it worked. And I thought, well, the unfortunate truth is they could put anything they want in there in the end as a liquid. And in particular, I think you can get away with a lot. So you could have adulterated product.
Right. And that makes me think of, I had a patient that was taking a B vitamin for, I think it was for their neuropathy. And they picked it up in Mexico and they were like, this is great. This really works. And I looked at the ingredients and it had a medication. I can't remember what, it may have had gabapentin in it or something. It had some medication, it said it was a B vitamin and it was listed on the label, or maybe it had a steroid. I can't remember.
Now that we're getting into labels, stay tuned because I have a story about someone who actually was hospitalized due to something they took.
Okay, so when we come back, we're going to talk about how to interpret a supplement label.
Okay, so I had one experience that actually did land a patient in the hospital, not because of anything I recommended, something they were taking on their own, and they actually didn't even divulge it to me until it was far too late. They went online, they heard about, I think it was Laetril, otherwise known as vitamin B17, which is a whole nother controversy that's decades long.
Not a vitamin, not a real
Not a vitamin. In any case, they thought that after what they read, they thought that this was going to be helpful for their cancer. So they procured Laetril from outside the country. And of course, they got sent these pills. They took these pills. Turns out that they were extremely high doses of vitamin D. This person was hospitalized due to high calcium and heart palpitations. I think they had a dysrhythmia. Their vitamin D level was over 800.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What's considered a normal vitamin D level is 30. Yeah, you don't want it anything close to, oh my gosh.
So they had 10 times the upper limit of how much vitamin D should be circulating. So this led to high calcium. High calcium led to heart arrhythmias, and that's what landed them in the hospital. Of course, I was on record as the naturopathic physician, so I don't know if fingers were pointed or not because I wasn't privy to any discussions behind the scenes. All I know is haven't seen it. It was pretty obscure, so I haven't seen anyone else do that. But it's buyer beware out there. And I can say, especially if you're getting it from anywhere outside your own country and knowing your own country's regulations, which is what we're going to talk about now.
Yeah, for sure. You know, you hear about people who are bodybuilders and they take those supplements. I mean, they can be adulterated with steroids or, other things. I mean, it's important that somebody knows how to find a good quality supplement.
Yes.
And I think the first thing is if a supplement promises you some sort of health benefit, buyer beware.
Yeah.
If it's going to cure everything, and you hear that, right? I mean, we get these liquids and powders and it's like, oh, but this will help with my arthritis, my heart disease and my diabetes and my cancer, and it'll make my hair grow longer, be suspicious.
Well, I say you should be suspicious of anyone or anything that says that they cure cancer.
Oh,
done. Mic drop, right?
You're talking like supplements and outside of an oncology.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm just.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah. When we're talking about supplements, because I've seen this, and this is the most unethical, gross example of buyer beware is I can name some. Protocell is one of them. Protocell was another liquid on the market that had a bunch of stuff in it that doesn't do anything.
If it had anything at all.
It's gone through a lot of iterations. It used to be called Cancel, and then it was Cantron, and then the FDA pulls it off the market. They come back with the same liquid in a different name. They promise to cure cancer. They charge hundreds and hundreds of dollars. The whole thing is a scam. And I will blatantly tell people what you're reading is bunk. It's crap. It's not real. I wish it were. If it were, clearly we wouldn't be working so hard to bring in integrative medicine and help people with much more complicated ways of optimizing health and living as long as possible. If there were a way to cure it, you wouldn't be able to suppress that. I know that because there's too many people with boots on the ground that are too good-hearted to let that happen. It's not going to happen.
Right. There's no big conspiracy.
No.
There definitely are people who prey on that. I mean, there are a lot of supplements out there that are targeting cancer patients.
Right. And in order to have prey, that means you're being predatory. Right. So like just the word itself, like you don't want to go to a predatory company who's preying on anyone with a false promise. Right.
So beware of false promises. How do we go about finding a supplement that's appropriate to take? Let's say vitamins, right? Okay. So you want to take a multivitamin, you're looking at the label. you've talked with your dietitian, you've talked with your oncologist, you've talked with your family practice doctor, your naturopath. It's okay to take a multivitamin. So what are you looking for on a label?
There are some designations on the label you can look for to at least see that minimal quality control has been done. One of them is CGMP, which is Certified Good Manufacturing Practices. And in other countries, you can find NSF or NSF International stamped on some supplements, and that's meeting manufacturing practices that meet the National Science Foundation certification. So those are a couple levels. And then there's also in the United States, there's USP. So USP may be a stamp that signifies better quality.
Right. So at the hospital, we had a whole process that if we brought in supplements to be sold, they had to be guaranteed for their quality control and all of that, that they were the appropriate quality. What was in the pill was on the label.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a time when I was seeing a patient. She was in survivorship. She was taking hesperidin, which is a supplement, She was taking that for her hot flashes and it was working great. And she was out of state and ran out of the pills, couldn't pick it up at the hospital. And so she ordered some through Amazon and the hesperidin didn't seem to work anymore.
Oh.
And we kind of figured out that, there are companies out there who are printing these labels that look like a recognized company.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what's in the capsule is not actually what is on the label.
Mm-hmm.
And so she switched back to the one that was sold at the hospital and it worked again.
Interesting. Yeah, I had a similar scenario. The wholesaler that I would buy products from would get in a certain enzyme from Germany called Wobenzyme. And Wobenzyme went through a time where, for whatever reason, their manufacturing plant was down. And what happened is, I don't know who or how they did this, but even to the wholesaler went out and found it out there in the world and ended up buying it. It looked exactly the same on the label, dispensed it to all of us, the end user, and then followed that up with, oh no, what we sent out, although it looks exactly like the stuff from Germany, is not coming from Germany. It's a fraud. It's a fraudulent product. So of course I go to the shelf, I pull it off. I happen to have some of the old stuff. And because this is an enzyme, it breaks down proteins on contact. I took a knife, I cut both in half because they're enterically coated. So you have to cut them in half. I stuck each half on my tongue.
Oh.
And just for the record, if you put strong pancreatic enzymes on your tongue, it starts to digest it.
We took one for the team, Tina.
I did. And sure enough, the fraudulent stuff did nothing. And the actual one from Germany left me with basically a little burn site on my tongue.
Yeah, this is where you being a vegetarian doesn't work to your advantage because you could have just gone in the fridge and taken out a piece of turkey and done the same thing and spared your poor tongue. That story is kind of great.
Yeah.
But, it's not great, but it's kind of great.
Well, I had to confirm that it was fraudulent because I wasn't sure.
Of course. Like I said, took one for the team.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah. So be aware of where you're purchasing these products as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You're best off making sure that it comes from a good wholesaler, someone who, if they make a mistake, will tell you so or finds out something out or get it straight from the company if possible. There's a big difference out there here. And there's another story. I'm going to give you one more story about quality control. We use a company that sells to doctors' offices, does not sell over the counter necessarily. There was a time where this is years ago, it was really difficult to find a clean curcumin on the market. Most all of the curcumin that was out there was adulterated and it had high lead levels specifically. So we couldn't get it from our favorite source, which this particular company tests every batch when it comes into their place. So they get, let's say they order 1 ton of curcumin powder, they take a little bit, they send it to a lab. If it doesn't pass their quality control, their interior company quality control test, this is way above and beyond USP, NSF, or GMP. If it doesn't pass, they reject it. There was 3, if not 6 months where I couldn't get any curcumin from them at all. So I asked them, what happens to that curcumin? What do you do with that powder? And they say, we send it back to the company that company overseas. I don't know if it was India or China or where they were getting it. But that company then turns around and dispenses it again, and it ends up as a cheap curcumin on the shelf through some company that doesn't retest it when they get it in, right? So I'm saying that still made it to the market. It just now is out there in the world as a curcumin with a little lead in it that nobody has retested for. And that's probably going to be a cheaper product. So you're going to find that in a discounted retailer of supplements.
That brings up a really good point of you can call a supplement company and you can ask them if their products undergo third-party testing, because it's easy for a company to say, oh yeah, we have the highest quality in-house testing, but finding a company that gets a third party not affiliated with them at all and have them assess their product is a sign of a better product.
Absolutely. It should undergo third-party testing, and let's put that bar higher. It should be every batch, every time. That's hard to do because legally that's way above and beyond what they're expected or required to do. And don't let them send you what's called a certificate of analysis. The certificate of analysis is being given to them by the very company that sold them the raw product. So that curcumin came with a certificate of analysis that said, no, our lead isn't very high at all. And then upon retesting, the company found out the lead was too high. So certificate of analysis is from the raw ingredient seller, and that's pretty close to useless.
I think this is all good information that a lot of people aren't familiar with.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's buyer beware. There are some regulations, and there's more now than there was 10 years ago. And I'm going to guess 10 years from now, we're going to have more regulations on quality control. But for now, this is what we would need to do to make sure that you're taking in clean supplements when you are buying them.
Okay, so safety issues in supplements. I think a lot of people have heard about, it was in the news like 7 years ago, where a bunch of supplements were tested. It was like echinacea and some other things from like stores like Walmart, Target, and they were found to not have the ingredient that was listed on the label at all. So I don't know, it was a completely different ingredient than what was advertised. And so that's kind of a really important thing with what we were saying in terms of knowing what is in the supplement in the first place.
Right, right. And I believe those were all botanical medicines. So they were all plants, and they used a plant DNA kind of thing. They were looking for DNA fragments from particular plants that were the label claim. And I can't remember which ones they were, which plants in particular, but I did talk to somebody who specializes this in the industry in another discussion that we can link to. Maybe we should make that into a podcast and just make it available.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so it's someone who their whole job is quality control.
Yeah, supplement quality control. And I think he used to be in pharmacy business, and now for the last 2 decades plus has done nutritional supplements or supplements in general. So yeah, we can link to that. I think he goes into great detail in that discussion. I know some of it had to do with the fact that these were extractions that were pulled from the shelf. And sometimes when you extract a plant, you no longer have any physical material. The DNA shouldn't be in the end product.
But they did find things in the product that also
That
should not have been in there. So I think it would be a really interesting conversation. So yeah, maybe we'll find the interview and link to it.
Yes, it's from 2018, but I think it still is very relevant. So we'll do that. And he's an expert on the topic. So he told me a lot of things I didn't know.
Nice.
Yeah.
The other big concern would be the interactions with medications. And this is, again, more with herbal supplements than it would be with vitamins and minerals. But I do want to mention one particular vitamin that does have interactions, and that's biotin.
Mm-hmm.
So biotin interferes with certain labs. Yes. And so people take biotin for, it's in hair and nail formulas. And a lot of patients after their cancer treatment will take it because they feel it helps with growing their hair back. I always advise patients to check their supplements to see if there is biotin, and I have them hold it for at least 3 days. I usually say a week because it's just easier, but at least 3 days prior to getting lab draws. So when they come for their 3-month checkup a week before they come out, I just say hold that supplement because of this potential for interaction. I think thyroid hormone is one of the labs that it interferes with, and I think it can also interfere with tumor markers.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't interfere with the tumor marker itself. It interferes with the lab that interprets the level of tumor marker.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. So biotin is really the only one I can think of offhand that would have like that sort of interaction.
Yeah, the only other one that I can think of that people might use is a glucometer. Vitamin C can show up on there. So
Oh,
vitamin C can throw off a glucose meter.
true.
When someone does blood stick, it can throw off glucose readings on that particular way, though, not on the lab, not when you see glucose on a lab, but when you just do a finger prick test.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, people already told this, but before giving any kind of stool sample, you withhold nutrients. And if you're going to get a test for any occult blood in the stool, you hold off on iron supplements, that kind of thing. And vitamin C for that matter, vitamin C and iron.
I think iron is a really good mineral to mention also because, again, cancer patients will start to feel tired. They're told they're anemic and they will start taking iron pills and pretty much don't take an iron pill unless you actually have been told to take an iron pill.
Right. You have to identify iron deficiency before supplementing with iron. Otherwise, it can be detrimental.
Yeah. I mean, iron, if you don't need it, can deposit in other areas in the body and it can be inflammatory.
And not all anemia is iron deficiency anemia. There are several types of anemia, and iron deficiency is only one of several ways of having anemia.
Right. So just because you hear the word that, oh, you're anemic does not mean that you're iron deficient. And so that would be another thing that I would caution patients about.
Yeah.
The big concern with taking herbal supplements is the potential that they may interfere with how the body processes prescription medications, chemotherapies, or just day-to-day medications. I think of things like, off the top of my head, what can interfere with tamoxifen or opioids, right? So our body metabolizes drugs through our digestive system, through our liver, through our gut. And there are these enzymes, these isoenzymes that help to metabolize anything that we ingest. So taking certain herbal medicines may actually alter the way a medication is processed, causing that medication to either speed through your body faster or to hold it back so you get a greater effect.
Yeah, the enzymes you're referring to are those cytochrome P450 enzymes, right?
Right. It often has that CYP before it. It'll say like CYP3A4, 2D6. Those are kind of the most common ones. There's also 2C9, 1A2.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the example that most people are familiar with that is it's a plant. It's not a botanical plant. It's a foodstuff. Grapefruit juice and blood pressure medications, right? So everyone's maybe heard of that. I think it's the most common example of this, where there's a plant that affects these enzymes in a way that changes the efficacy of that medication.
Right. So if a person takes certain heart medications, they're cautioned against taking or eating or drinking grapefruit juice at all because of the fact that it will enhance the effect of those medications because it slows down that process. That is also a contraindication with tamoxifen, no grapefruit juice because of that.
Yeah. So grapefruit juice affects that cytochrome P450 that you mentioned, which is 3A4. And 3A4 is the cytochrome P450 enzyme that the majority of drugs do go through at some point. So the vast majority, I don't remember if it's 2/3 or 3/4 of drugs use that enzyme as part of their pathway to either be activated or to be broken down, depending on the drug.
Another known herbal supplement, another plant that does this a very similar thing is, and I believe we've mentioned this before, is St. John's wort. So that's the one that is kind of like the textbook when talking about herbs and interactions. So St. John's wort also can interact with those.
Yeah. And back to what you originally said, plants in general are more likely to interact with drugs because some plant stuffs are drug-like, right? St. John's wort is a good example of a plant that we use, and its net effect is very much like some of the antidepressants that are used. So some plants are just shy of being a drug. That's why their interaction likelihood is much higher than a nutrient like vitamin C or magnesium or whatever. That said, I know it's not our topic, but drug-drug interactions also happen. So people, once they have 3 medications, 4 medications, I always advocate one pharmacy system to have all your medications so that interactions will be flagged.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I've even seen recently on social media where there are cancer patients who are on certain medications that interact that was never caught by their oncologist or their pharmacist. So I think that is a really good point.
Yes, and you have to actually ask them. Everyone's in a hurry these days and no one's going to say anything. So you might want to say, can you just do an interaction checker? I mean, you can do it online yourself, but you're best off doing it with a pharmacist whose license is really on the line to look for those things, right? That's their job.
Right. And there are like positive interactions and there are negative interactions. And so just because something is an interaction doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing. It just means that somehow it is being affected.
Right.
In some way. So there are some websites, some you have to pay for, but there are some free websites where you can kind of look at least for herbal medicines.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just put links to those in our show notes.
Oh, yeah. Great.
I do want to say that because it is very popular, that there is potential for certain cannabis products to interact with medications too.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully nobody is smoking cigarettes, but cigarettes, tobacco, it's an herb. It can interact, and it can interact with treatments for cancer.
Yeah. The other thing we should mention besides those enzymes is just absorption of oral medications. So if someone takes a fiber supplement, especially, fibers can often adhere to the compounds. It's called adsorption, adsorption. Adsorption is when a molecule that is next to the medication binds to it and keeps it from being absorbed in the first place. So it'll stay in the gut and be processed that way. So making sure you don't take anything at the same time as the medication that might adsorb to that medication and hold it in your gut is important.
Right. So avoiding taking fiber, avoiding taking calcium with certain things. Thyroid medicine is the one most people think of. Not everybody remembers getting that advice. Some people probably never were given that advice to not take calcium with thyroid medication.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just being aware that there are things that can block the absorption of medication.
All right. Well, I think this brings us to the point where we get to talk about our song. Did you pick a song for us?
Oh, I picked a song. The song for this episode is Vitamins by Queen Herbie.
Nice. Okay.
Vitamin A, vitamin B. I'm not going to sing it, but and I'm probably not going to do a reel. Maybe I'll do a reel. It's really popular because everybody's doing reels with it. But yeah, it's a fun song.
And for the non-Instagram aficionados out there, a reel is an Instagram thing. Just so you know.
I forget that there are people who aren't on Instagram, but yeah.
I think the vast majority of the world is not on Instagram. It just seems like everybody's on there.
Yeah, if you're on Instagram, it seems like everyone's on Instagram. Anyways, it is a social media popular song, and I thought it would be kind of fun for this episode.
It's my kind of song. I like it.
Well, and that means a lot.
I'm just saying. I like it.
Well, because you're a little bit country, and it's not a country song.
No, but I'm just a little bit country.
A little bit.
I'm a little bit 80s New Yorker, too.
Yeah, and that we have a lot in common.
We do.
Yeah. So that brings us to the end of the first episode of our Supplements 101 pod. We're going to continue talking about supplements in the next episodes, just things that patients ask us about quite often.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to start out with fish oil, right?
Yep. Omega-3 fatty acids is our next episode.
All right. And as always, like us, subscribe, follow,
or whatever it says on your podcast streamer. The episodes can come to you straight without having to look for them. And if you need to look for them, you can always find all of these episodes on our website, thecancerpod.com. And follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. And it's always The Cancer Pod.
We keep it simple.
Easy to find. So on that note, I'm Dr. Leah Sherman.
And I'm Dr. Tina Kaiser.
And this is The Cancer Pod.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to The Cancer Pod. Remember to subscribe, review, and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media for updates. And as always, this is not medical advice. These are our opinions. Talk to your doctor before changing anything related to your treatment plan. The Cancer Pod is hosted by me, Dr. Leah Sherman, and by Dr. Tina Kaiser. Editing by Brogan Malloy. Music is by Kevin MacLeod. See you next time. I've been waking up smiling, working out, sleeping in, taking vitamins. Vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin B, vitamin please.